Good morning. I'm John Bitson, the Menard Family Director of the Sheila and Robert Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. Welcome to the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop. I'm really excited today that we're joined by Francis Wee and Eric Kohn. We had an outstanding screening last night of the movie The Hongkonger, and Eric is the producer of The Hongkonger. He's going to tell you a little bit about that today. And Francis is a political activist, has been a political activist for Hong Kong and for freedom in Hong Kong for a long time. She's the first person to receive political asylum in the United States from Hong Kong. And super excited that they're both here today. I think you're going to be very inspired by Francis's story. And if you have seen the movie, The Hongkonger, you can't help but be inspired by the story of Jimmy Lai. So without any further delay, I'm going to read their bios, and then we'll have Eric and Francis come up here. So Eric Kohn is the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Acton Institute. He is a producer of the award-winning film The Hongkonger, Jimmy Lai's Extraordinary Struggle for Freedom, the newest documentary feature from the Acton Institute released in 2022. He's also the executive producer of Acton's podcast network, where he hosts a weekly roundtable podcast, Acton Unwind, and is part-time host of Acton Line, Acton's weekly interview podcast. Francis Wee is the first public activist from Hong Kong to receive political asylum in the United States. At the early age of 14, Wee started her involvement in Hong Kong social movements. She was a former standing committee member of Scholarism and a campaigner for multiple pro-democracy candidates in Hong Kong. Previously a journalist, Wee's column, I Am from Hong Kong, Not China, in April 2019, was a widespread piece across the globe that spoke to the foundation of the pro-democracy movement. Currently based in the United States, Wee continues her advocacy in Washington at the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation as a Policy and Advocacy Coordinator, which advocates for Hong Kong on the international agenda. She also heads the organization We the Hongkongers, dedicated to promoting and strengthening the culture and identity of Hong Kongers abroad. So without any further delay, let's welcome Eric and Francis.
Well, thank you, John. Good morning. Very happy to be here. Thanks to NDSU for having us. So as John mentioned, I'm a Director of Marketing and Communications at the Acton Institute. Let me tell you a little bit about Acton, and then I want to show you the trailer for the film. I know some of you were able to be there to see the screening last night. The good news, if you weren't able to see the whole thing, I'll have these available, these cards that have a link to where you can watch the film. It's on YouTube. The Acton Institute was founded in 1990 by a Catholic priest and a Catholic layman. Our mission is to promote a free and virtuous society characterized by individual liberty and sustained by religious principles. We really think that Jimmy Lai, who's the subject of this film, is a really good character study of that. As you'll see in the film, as you'll hear from Francis in the story about Hong Kong, this is a city much different from the current circumstances and much different from China, which it is now a part of, had these kind of basic elements of human freedom that we all enjoy: freedom of speech, the rule of law, freedom of religion. And since 1997 in the handover, we've been watching that slowly being taken away from them. I have a good friend who says that for everything that you do in life, there are two reasons. There's the good reason and the real reason. So why did we want to make this film? The good reason we want to make the film is we need heroes like Jimmy Lai. We need people who are willing to stand up and do the right thing, even at great cost to themselves. As you'll see from the trailer, as you'll see in the entire film if you watch it, Jimmy's a billionaire. He has British citizenship. He could have left and come to the United States, to the United Kingdom, to Taiwan. He could have gotten out at any point in time. And he chose to stay, knowing that if he did stay, he was going to end up in prison, probably for the rest of his life. That kind of thing is not easy to do. And there's a moment in the film, one of the people we interviewed for it is Lord Patton, who was the last colonial governor of Hong Kong. He was the man there giving the speech in 1997 when they handed it back to China. And at one point in the film, he says about Jimmy that I think he's been incredibly principled and brave. And I think that I could have been as brave. And this incredibly dignified, impressive man, you just hear in his voice and you see in his eyes this recognition, I could not do what Jimmy Lai is currently doing. I couldn't do what Jimmy Lai is currently doing. I don't think most people could do what Jimmy Lai is currently doing. Most people couldn't do what Nelson Mandela did. Most people couldn't do those kinds of things. But we can find those moments in our lives when we are challenged to do the right thing, that we can choose to do the right and virtuous thing. Like as C.S. Lewis said, that courage is the summation of all other virtues at their testing point. So we think Jimmy was an incredible story to tell, and we need to tell stories of heroes like that. What's the real reason that we made this film? Jimmy is a longtime personal friend of our co-founders, Chris Maurin and Father Robert Sirico. They've known him for 25 years. They visited him in Hong Kong. We interviewed him first for a documentary that came out about 15 years ago called The Call of the Entrepreneur, which was about Jimmy's entrepreneurial ventures. He started this company Giordano, which was this great clothing line. He started Next Media, a magazine, and then a newspaper, the largest circulation Chinese language pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong. So we had all of this interview footage with him. We'd interviewed him a couple times since then. We had friends and partners who had interviewed him, who made that footage available to us. We thought, we're in a unique place to be able to tell his story. And we wanted to tell it because we thought that Jimmy in particular, but Hong Kong in general at the time, was not getting the attention that it deserved. I said, apologies to the people who were there at the screening last night and they're hearing me repeat myself. But as a marketer, I believe in repetition. As a marketer, I believe in repetition. And I now lost my train of thought where I was going to say. So we wanted to tell this. We wanted to tell this story because we felt uniquely positioned to be able to do so because it wasn't getting the attention it deserves. So for the last 10 years, we've been a very inward-looking nation. Good reasons, bad reasons, be that as it may. I would like to think that in different times we'd be paying as much attention to what was happening in Hong Kong as we paid in the 1980s to what was happening in Eastern Europe under Soviet domination. These are people who have human rights to live as free individuals, who did for a long time and are having it taken away from them. And we wanted to bring more attention to that. Frances is going to talk more about her personal experience, the work that she's doing now to bring more attention to the cause of the city of Hong Kong. And then I'll probably talk a little bit at the end about what you can do to help us share the story. And again, I'll pass out some of these cards in a little bit here. But right now, before I turn it over to Frances, why don't we show the trailer for the film? Again, you can pick up one of these and you can watch the entire film on your own. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. I encourage you to. I think it's, obviously I'm a producer of it, so I'm kind of obliged to say this, but I have been humbled by the reaction that we've gotten to the film, and I think it's a very important thing for people to hear more about. So we can go ahead and roll the trailer, and then I'll turn it over to Frances.
The future, which is unknown and uncertain, is still unknown for me, but is certain.
Freedom was a very short journey for me.
He came as basically a refugee from China when he was a teenager.
I was put in the bottom of the fishing trunk, and by the afternoon, we arrived in Hong Kong. And the same night, I was taken to a factory to work as a worker. What we eat and sleep in the factory.
He was so poor, not highly educated.
It was a very happy time. It was a time that I know I had a future.
For a Chinese, that's like going from Kansas in black and white to Oz, where everything seems like it's possible.
As long as you wanted to work, you could make it in Hong Kong.
But British gave us all the institutions of freedom. Freedom of speech, rule of law, property right, freedom of assembly, and let our resourcefulness flourish.
We went from an incredibly poor city to a metropolis.
So I started a very small factory.
He's a classic entrepreneur.
And then I went into retailing.
Giordano was this huge brand.
If I just go on making money, it doesn't mean anything to me. If I go into the media business, I deliver choice, and choice is freedom.
Apple Daily played a very important role in Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement.
We've never had a territory of 7.5 million people who have lived and breathe, their basic freedom, having that taken away from them.
Hongkonger means determination, fearlessness, the belief in human rights.
Mr. Lai insisted on marching in front where the authorities could see him.
I've been arrested 3 times.
The Hong Kong police raided the Apple Daily compound.
Very likely that I will have to go to prison.
He chose to stay in Hong Kong.
Their house is firebombed.
All I had, this place gave me.
I watched this man willingly give up the life of a billionaire to become a dissident.
This is a time for sacrifice. Even if they kill me, I will have to fight to the last day.
He's probably the most famous newspaper man now jailed in the world.
I love freedom. My life.
Hi, do you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Well, okay. So hi everyone, I'm Francis. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's truly my honor to be here and sharing with you about my story. I think every time when I go to a college to give talks and share my story, I think it's a crazy idea because 3 years ago I just graduated from college, and now I'm speaking at a college giving a talk as if like I'm any expert or salt, but I'm truly not. I'm just someone who lived a life that thinking that freedom would exist. And I've always grew up in that Hong Kong, that freedom is guaranteed. And then at one point, it was taken away overnight. And I grew up at the same time when Hong Kong, I enjoy all the freedom, and then all of a sudden, it went away. I saw how it fell apart, and this is the story that I'm telling. And I don't know if you guys can see it actually right there in the photo, in the middle, there's a man who showed the 5, that's Jimmy Lai, and he always stood in the front, and he has been a symbol of our movement. Now he has already spent in jail for over 1,000 days. And the reality of Hong Kong right now is that everyone knows a person who is in jail. They're all political prisoners. They could be as young as you or even younger. There are high school students, there are women, there are girls, there are boys and men, father and mothers. The youngest is actually 14 years old. And if you put that into context, that's just someone who just got to middle school and they were arrested and put in jail for being in part of a protest to defend their freedom and human rights. So if you're wondering where Hong Kong is, I get that a lot because it is a really small place. If you zoom out from, in the map, you can only pinpoint it because it's so small. But it's actually in the southeast of China. But in it, there is 7.2 million people. So a lot of people, 1/3 of them actually took to the streets to fight for democracy and human rights. And that's, if you think about 1/3 of the population going to the streets to do so, that's massive. And that's the number of people that is really freedom loving and hoping that they could sustain that lifestyle of living, but then was all crushed by the Chinese government. This is me. I was born and raised in Hong Kong in 1999, just 2 years after the handover. If you have seen the movie yesterday, you probably known a lot about the history of the handover. But basically, Hong Kong was formerly a British colony, and in 1997, it was officially handed over back to China. And there are a lot of different things going into like the agreement, different documents that promises were made, but to simply put it, Hong Kong people was guaranteed with basic human rights, 50 years and change of their way of living, and even though they are handed over to China, they are ran in a different system. We have our judicial system, we have our own government. Hong Kong people govern Hong Kong people, and that makes sense. And we enjoy freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and publishing. All that kind of things seems fine. And Hong Kong people were optimistic that nothing is going to change. That was the promise that China have given at that time. And so I just grew up, in that environment, knowing that Hong Kong is a little different from China, but we're still part of China, right? And so at that time, as a little kid, I don't really think about, who I am, what's the differences of like my identity or whatnot. If we're part of China, then I am a Chinese. So then I learn about, the civil liberties that we enjoy. Again, the freedom of speech and freedom of press. It's what I grew up with learning. These are, protests and marches in the past. If you think about how Hong Kong people loved freedom, you can look at this picture, and it actually happened on a holiday. And it's a tradition in Hong Kong that on certain holidays, you would take to the streets and voice your opposition, raise awareness on issues that you care about. Think about what you would do in a holiday. You spend time with your family, you do things that you like, but this is us. We go to the streets and we raise awareness on issues that we care about. And this is, again, it's a tradition. It goes on every year and every year. What really changed me and made me think about who I am and what's the difference between Hong Kong and China is when I learned about the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. It happened in Beijing, China, where a massive crowd of Chinese students, they took to the Tiananmen Square and to fight for political reform, a democratic reform. Eventually, they faced a really violent crackdown. And as a 10-year-old, I learned about this history on TV, and I searched it up online. What I saw was all bloody picture, all flesh, because what happened was the government sent out troops and tanks. They ran over bodies, they shoot people, and a lot of people died in that movement. And many of them, actually, majority of these people were students, college students at your age. And this is the Tank Men. I know that later on you guys would have the chance to see the movie Tank Men, and you probably would know better about this history. But it really struck me as a kid, as a 10-year-old, that this happened 20 years before that. And I know the world was thinking China is going to democratize, it's going to make progress, it's going to open up to the Western world. Perhaps it's going to change. This is in the past, and 30 years ago in the history, this is not going to happen. But it really planted a seed in me, knowing that, it's really different in Hong Kong, that we get the freedom to be on the streets and speak out and, make changes and possibly make changes to, change the government's proposal or whatnot. And so Hong Kong do this annual vigil to commemorate the June 4th, the Tiananmen Square massacre. It goes on every year, and you see all people holding candles. And imagine this is actually the biggest park in Hong Kong, the Victoria Park, and it's just occupied by people, all candles every year. And at that time, I was like, I want to be part of it. And so this is me. When I was 10 years old, I was holding a candle in part of the vigil. And I truly felt how powerful it is to be in an assembly, a public assembly, where you're surrounded by people share the same values. I didn't know about how it felt when it happened. I wasn't born, but I was really moved by how people persist and, just be there and remember this part of history and ask for the history to be told, because in China, if you talk about this, no one knows about it. No kids learn about this piece of history because it's all blended. It's not being mentioned, and it's completely censored. And Hong Kong was once a place that the only place in China that you can commemorate and you can mention about the Tiananmen Square massacre. It planted a seed in me, and in 2012. The government proposed an education scheme, which basically is to force students to take patriotic education, and what you learn about the Tiananmen Square massacre would not be in these textbooks. And so a bunch of students took to the streets, and they boycott class, they do hunger strikes to try to force the government to change their mind, which they did. And this part of this group is called Scholarism. Later on, I joined this group. It's all a bunch of high school students, and it started this unprecedented time that high school students would wear school uniforms and they would be out on the streets. And it allowed, younger people to be part of social movements and really, be part of political negotiation or whatever you call it. But we were there in school uniform, and I think it opened a new door for younger people to be involved in activism. Later on, the umbrella movement started in 2014, and it was also started by Scholarism and other political and social groups in Hong Kong. What it did was to try to oppose a bill that was proposed by the government, which would further limit our way to elect our own officials. But in the basic law, it was promised that Hong Kong people would eventually get the rights to vote for their government, to vote for their chief executive, their lawmakers. And this bill would do the exact opposite. And so people were mad, they took to the streets. And if you ever wonder why it's called umbrella movement, you can probably tell from this picture. When the peaceful protesters took to the streets, they were confronted by the police. Pepper spray, tear gas was launched. There was no, like in the past in history that, a peaceful protest would meet with tear gas. And that was the first time on that day, the police launched, I believe it's over 80 canisters of tear gas just against people who were just holding umbrellas. And so people would take umbrellas out from their backpack, as every Hong Kongers does. Like we all have an umbrella with us. We take it out and use it as a shield against the pepper spray. And then the Western media started to name it as the umbrella movement. The movement lasted for 79 days, and I was still a student at that time. We occupied 3 main areas of Hong Kong, and we were able to make the government suspend the bill. But we weren't successful in asking for universal suffrage. Hong Kong people never get democracy. We never had a time that we can directly elect our own officials, which was promised in the basic law. And so after the umbrella movement, I continue to be part of the group. Every week we go to the streets and we, set up a booth and we give speech on the streets and hand out leaflets about certain issues that we want to raise awareness of. Then later on, I came to the US to study journalism because I really wanted to see if I can be a journalist and one day, my English would be better and then I could have like good writing skills and I can go back to Hong Kong and write about Hong Kong on foreign media. And so that was my thought at that time. And in April 2019, I wrote an article on my student newspaper, which I was an editor of, called I'm from Hong Kong, Not China, which all it goes to say is to talk about my identity as a Hong Konger, how I felt like I was being, Hong Konger is being overlooked, it's underrepresented in my school. And I want to share with my peers the historical background of Hong Kong and why Hong Kongers would have the identity of being a Hong Konger instead of Chinese. That was my intention. I never thought it would blow up. But it was met by a huge backlash by the Chinese students community. People said I hurt their feeling with my article. I got death threats from students in the same school. I constantly felt like I'm being, watched and being followed because on their chat group, there would literally be pictures of me on campus. And the school didn't take it seriously. There is a huge student population. I believe 60% of the international students was from China at that time. The school did not condemn what they did. But back in Hong Kong and even around the world, Hong Kongers were really encouraged. This article blew up because they felt it resonates with them. It spoke to their heart about, the complication of being someone who live in Hong Kong, struggling with this identity problem, being Chinese or Hong Konger. And it basically blew up in the globe. And all of a sudden I became someone, my name was known, my face is out there. And so I recognized that Hong Kong people need a voice. They want people to be out in the international environment to tell the story. And in around, I believe, like around the same time, April 2019, I was aware of the extradition law that was being introduced in Hong Kong. What it does is that any criminals or suspects in Hong Kong could be extradited to China for trial. And if you remember about the one country, two systems, Hong Kong run separately from China. We have our own court, our legal system. There is never a time that, you know, a nationals could be extradited to China, because in China, they have their own law, their own rule. And the conviction rate in China is actually 99.9%. There's no way you could win that. And what they would target journalists, politicians, dissidents, and make trump up charges and put you in jail. And so everyone was like, okay, this is a complete breach of one country, two system. It's undermining rule of law in Hong Kong. And people took to the streets. And I was wondering at that time, I was in Boston in the US, and I was wondering, what can I do with, you know, the popularity that I developed through my article? What can I do, you know, further to raise more, like to bring people to attention? And so I started to organize rallies in the US. Hold on, sorry. I started to organize rallies in the, oh, sorry, it's not here. I started to organize rallies in the US and coordinates rallies around the world. And, you know, on June 9th, which is the second rallies in to oppose the bill, we got around like over 50 cities around the world to have the same rallies telling people about the extradition bill. This took place in Hong Kong, where when lawmakers, judges, and lawyers took to the streets and did like a silent walkout to oppose the bill. And this is that bad when lawyers, people in the legal sector, they put off their hat and say, I would step out and voice our opinion with my identity as part of the legal sector. And so it encouraged a lot of people to take to the streets. In total, at the very beginning, there were 1 million people, then 2 million people. And again, that's 1/3 of the population in Hong Kong that took to the streets to protest against the bill. And I was in the US, and I was thinking that other than coordinating rallies, maybe I should also educate more people about the background of Hong Kong. And so I was traveling a lot and to tell people the situation, including in Washington, where I meet lawmakers and people in the administration to inform them about the situation and to push for legislation that would support the people of Hong Kong. Throughout the movement is leaderless. We always call it, you know, the number one symbol of the movement is that no one was a leader. Everyone can take up a role. And so with that spontaneousness, you know, if you are good at graphic design, you do graphics, you make education materials. If you're good at, you know, you have the good physique and you know, really good physical strength, people would choose to go to the front line and confront the police. If you're really good at direction, you would be the person who tell people about direction, like which street has like a police there doing stop and search and things like that. Everyone jumped in their role. No one is the leader. Everyone has a role. And that's how people kind of, you know, spontaneously come together to make this movement happen. Later on in March, when the movement was still going on, I started this Write in Hongkonger campaign in the US to encourage Hong Kongers in the US to write in Hongkonger on their US census. If you guys have participated in the census, you probably have ticked some, you know, racial category and declare what ethnicity that you identify as. But there was only Chinese. Every time Hong Kongers is being lumped together in that category. So I started this campaign asking Hong Kongers to write in Hongkonger. And as you can see, I think I met the fundraising goal in like a few days, because everyone felt this is, you know, a campaign that has been long overdue. Like everyone was waiting for something like this to happen. And so at that same time, I founded We the Hongkongers, hoping that the idea of Hongkongers can be promoted on international stages. Then, as you all know, COVID hit. I graduated from college, and when COVID hit, I was like, there's no point for me to staying in the US anymore. And so I went back to Hong Kong. I wanted to be part of the movement. I went back. I continue to do whatever I can in my role. I, supported candidates in democratic elections. And here, this is one of the candidates that is pro-democracy. And actually, 47 people who ran in the election who helped organizing that Democratic primary they are all now arrested and charged and imprisoned in Hong Kong, including my friend there, Owen Chow. He is also serving in jail right now, waiting for a sentence. In July 2020, the government has this draconian national security law that was being introduced. What it does is it criminalizes any acts of secession, subversion, colluding with foreign forces, and terrorism. And to put it into context, today, while I'm standing here sharing with you my story, I am violating the national security law. Eric said it yesterday. I like it very much, is that when he made the film, when he was producing the film, when he was giving talks to people about the film, he was also in a daily violation of national security law, even though he's not in Hong Kong. And if today you go out to the streets and become a face of the movement, there's no way for you to go back to Hong Kong. And I remember a few days after the law is being enacted, I got calls from my friends, a trusted source, with insider tips that my name is being on the watch list. And you should better go or get arrested. So I took a few days to consider my future. And I was, 21 years old. I have no idea what I was doing. What's my future? And so my thought was, I will leave right now with my student visa, which was still valid at that time. I will leave now and see what's going to happen. Later on, maybe things get better. I can go back to Hong Kong. And so I left a few days after I received those information, hoping that there would be chances for me to go back to Hong Kong. But then 2 weeks later, a young activist was arrested under the national security law. He was even younger than me. And I didn't expect him to be the first one to be arrested under the law. And I recognize the extent of what I am doing and how it's going to expose me to the risk of being arrested. And so later on, Jimmy Lai was also arrested. Many other people were arrested. And that's when I know that there's no way back. And so in December 2020, I announced to the public that I have already left Hong Kong due to safety concerns. And I recognize the need for someone who have a public face and names to be out there to advocate for Hong Kong, because many people do not have, they either can't do it, they don't have the platform, the ability, or the willingness to do so because of concerns of different things. They're concerned that they can't go back to Hong Kong. There are families in Hong Kong. And so I realized that I have the obligation to use my name to continue to advocate for Hong Kong. I did so by publicizing that I have left Hong Kong and now there's no way back. I'm going to continue what I'm doing for Hong Kong. And then while I announced it, I also started my process of applying for asylum. And it's surprising enough that I got approved half year after that I filed the application, which again is surprisingly fast. I have no idea how that happened. I have friends who have waited for years for it to, for them to hear from the government, but never heard back. There are friends who are still waiting. I don't know how I was being prioritized, but I was really fortunate that at that time I became the first political asylee from Hong Kong that got asylum in the US. And again, that just strengthened my intention. Like it just confirmed that my intention of being a face of Hong Kongers, that I have the obligation to speak up and to be more vocal about what's going on in Hong Kong. I want to leave to Eric to talk more about the current situation in Hong Kong. But before I end, after I got asylum in the US, I joined this Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. And currently I'm based in Washington, DC. What we're doing is to continue to keep lawmakers and people running Washington aware of what's going on in Hong Kong. We want to make sure Hong Kong is not being forgotten, because as you can see, the story of Hong Kong is not just my story, Jimmy Lai's story. It is the story of 7.2 million people who took to the streets and fight for freedom, and all of a sudden it went away overnight. And it is the story that tells us how treacherous freedom is. We don't realize how important it is until we lose it. And Hong Kong currently has over 1,500 political prisoners that are sitting in jail for fighting for freedom, human rights, and democracy. And just to think about it, let it sit in your mind. 1,500, and everyone in Hong Kong knows someone, at least one person in their family or friends that are in jail. And all we have been doing was to protect our home, to defend our home from being taken away from the Chinese government. And what I am doing here is to make sure that the international community know this is what we are doing. And even though many people have left Hong Kong, none of us have given up. And we continue to bring a spotlight to Hong Kong. Recently, there have been momentums in Washington to keep the attention to Hong Kong. Yesterday, there was a bill called Hong Kong Sanctions Act, which was introduced in Congress to hold judges and prosecutors accountable for their role in undermining rule of law in Hong Kong. So today, what I am here today talk to you about this is to also help you to understand the historic context of Hong Kong and what happened in the past few years. And hopefully the next time when you see Hong Kong in your news, you remember about my story, Jimmy Lai's story, and the story of over 1,500 political prisoners in Hong Kong, because all we were doing is just to protect what we deserve to have, which is freedom. So I will hand it over to Eric to wrap this up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. Talk real quick about some of those freedoms that Jimmy highlighted when you heard him talking in the trailer. The ones who've been taken away from Hong Kongers. So freedom of assembly. As Francis mentioned, COVID, right? So this was a very convenient excuse for the Chinese Communist Party to say, the candlelight vigil that always happened in Victoria Park, you need a permit for that. Well, COVID, too dangerous to give you a permit for people to gather there. It was a very, very convenient way for them to kill this gathering that had been going on ever since the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. Freedom of the press. Apple Daily, the newspaper that Jimmy Lai ran, doesn't exist anymore. It was shut down in 2021. I was able to speak with a panel about this film at this conference that we host for the Acton Institute called Acton University, pretty much on the 1-year anniversary of Apple Daily being shut down. There is no real meaningful freedom of the press in Hong Kong right now. Freedom of speech. I don't know if you've seen about this, but as Hong Kong has tried to recover from the economic impacts of COVID, the airline there has been offering free tickets for people who want to come and visit Hong Kong. Free ticket to go someplace you've never been, right? Sounds awesome. If you want to go, watch what you say. Because as Francis noted, I don't know, it's like the 200th time I'm sitting watching this film that I was a part of making. And as she had pointed out, my friend Benedict Rogers, who runs Hong Kong Watch in the United Kingdom, he says in the film that every single day sitting in London criticizing what's going on in China and Hong Kong, I'm in daily violation of the national security law. Like the 200th time I'm watching this film, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, oh crap, I guess I am too, right? If you go, watch what you say, because there's no meaningful sense of freedom of speech there. You cannot express what you are thinking. Freedom of religion. Hong Kong had always been one of the freest places that people could who practice any faith. Jimmy is a Catholic convert. They were always free to do so there. Not as much anymore, and I think the bigger story of highlighting how freedom of religion is being oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party is actually in northwest China, in the Xinjiang province. If you've heard of the Uyghur minority up there, that is a Muslim minority population who is essentially being exterminated by the Chinese Communist Party. They are being put into labor and re-education camps. Women are being sterilized. Women are being moved around and married off to Han Chinese men, or moved into Han Chinese areas. So the likelihood that if they get married, it is going to be to someone of Han Chinese descent, so that this ethnic minority ceases to exist over time. That is what the Chinese Communist Party thinks of freedom of religion. What is the status of Jimmy Lai? I'll sum up with that, and then we want to take some questions from you. So Jimmy has now been in prison for over 1,000 days. He has been convicted in 2 trials. The most recent of the 2 was on this very trumped up fraud charge that, I will be honest with you, like, you know, I get paid to pay attention to this kind of stuff for a living. I have a difficult time explaining the actual ins and outs of this legal case. It has to do with, you know, subletting some of his office space at Apple Daily to another organization that, even though this is, you know, the kind of thing that would be completely above board if any of us were to do it if we had a property, turned into this fraud case where he got a little over 5 years in prison for that conviction. The national security law trial, which is the big one, was supposed to start earlier this year. It was delayed until mid-September. In early September, it was delayed until December 18th. That's now when it is supposed to start. Why the constant delays? Well, as Francis's colleague Mark Clifford, Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, says, show trials take a lot of rehearsal. You need a lot of time to practice that. One of the judges who's sitting in trial over the trial of the 47 activists or the candidates that Francis was talking about is supposed to be on the panel for Jimmy's trial. So they're waiting for that one to be over. You know, why would you be waiting for one specific judge unless you knew what that judge was going to do, right? So like we know what the outcome of Jimmy's national security law trial is going to be when and if it happens. It is my personal opinion that I don't think they necessarily want it to actually happen. Jimmy's in his 70s. I think they hope he dies in prison. I think they hope that they don't actually have to go forward with that trial. But keep your eyes out in December to see if that actually does transpire. That will be one of these cases of the largest amount of media attention I hope that will get paid to what is going on with Jimmy. I just close by noting, though, that, you know, they can attempt to do all these things to a man like Jimmy, but when you know yourself and when you have a center of faith and virtue like Jimmy does, by all accounts, he's in good spirits. He reads. You can look this up in the National Catholic Register that people will be able to send postcards to him, and he's been sending back these hand drawings of Christ on the cross that he's done. He's walked into this knowingly and accepting his fate, whatever it may be, because he wants to be a symbol of the resistance to what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to people like him, but to the city of Hong Kong and the people of Hong Kong. So keep an eye out for the trial to start in December. Follow us at the Acton Institute on social media. We'll keep you updated there on what we're doing to help draw more attention to this. And of course, Francis and Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong doing great work. You should follow them as well. With that, we'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Because we're doing the Zoom thing, I just encourage you, because I'll repeat, or Francis will repeat the question so the people on Zoom could hear it, so that we ask you to phrase your question in the form of a question. And I'll repeat it as succinctly as I possibly can. Thank you. Anybody?
Thank you.
I'll repeat it, yeah.
So my question is for Francis. When you started becoming a target on campus, why did the university ever respond with any kind of explanation as to the issue? And two, how did that make you feel?
Yeah.
The question is, when she started getting attention on campus, what did the university do, and what were your feelings when you were in that position?
Awful. I felt really alone, isolated. The school administration had meetings with me twice. It was over the final as well, and it was really stressful for me. I cried in front of them many times that, why are you not taking actions? The only statement the International Students Department put out is to say that we respect freedom of speech and we respect the diversity of people's voice. We ask everyone to respect each other. But it's funny that when it happens to something different, when it's about a racial issue or like other more, I guess, sensitive, like an issue that American pay more attention to, they get scared and they would like positively respond to it and call names, call people out for doing so, for discrimination or whatnot. But in that case, because it was involved in political nuances and debates between China and Hong Kong, they didn't want to get involved, and so they stay silent. They were saying, we respect that, but the threats and assaults protected by free speech? I don't think so. When someone sent me the death threat and that's a student at my school, I think you should speak up and something should happen to that student, but they didn't do anything. And I remember in that year for the commencement, the graduation ceremony, I saw that guy who sent me the death threats walk down the aisle and got the certificates, and he graduated. And I saw that and I was like, where's my justice? Everyone in Hong Kong resonates with me, and it's not a hate that only comes out from me. I never put hate in my article. What I was doing is to explain my place as a Hong Konger, why people in Hong Kong do not identify as Chinese. And I get different things too when I share with when I introduce myself as, I'm Francis, I am from Hong Kong. Chinese students in my school, in a group discussion, they would chuckle, they mock me for saying that I come from Hong Kong. And when I share my story, I learn about other people's story as well. It is daily for them when they are abroad, and when they introduce themselves, when they talk about Hong Kong, they get mocked by Chinese students. And I don't blame them for why this is happening, because they have been taught and educated since they were a kid that Hong Kong is part of China, and whoever is opposing the fact that Hong Kong is part of China, it's basically subverting the government and it's offending us. It's, they're the enemy. And so they will report to the government for these kind of actions and speech. But I felt really isolated. I am not proud to tell people that I graduated from that school, to be very honest with you. The last year, my senior year, I spent most of my time to advocate for Hong Kong during the 2019 movement. And I would wish that people in my school would at least say something about the movement and, the treatment that, their treatment on Hong Kong, but I never get response from them. I don't know what they think about the situation right now, but it was a really isolated situation. And I know that a lot of Hong Kongers around the world have that same experience in their own life. Yeah.
I just note, I know because John said some of you may have to run at about 10 till. I put these cards back by both doors, so feel free to grab one on your way out. And for the people on Zoom, the website is freejimmylie.com. Yeah, in the back there.
Emerson College in Boston is namely a #1 journalism school, and I was really excited that I could go there, but it wasn't happy. I mean, everything is fine, but when that happened, I just didn't feel like I was accepted.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The question is how does it feel being, so far away from where you're from?
Yeah, in exile, it's crazy to think that you would never be able to go back home. I have friends who are in Hong Kong. I always tell people that most of my friends, all of my friends, they're either in jail in Hong Kong or they're in exile. And again, this is the reality of Hong Kong right now. And my feelings, my experience of being in exile, it's nothing different from other people, the tens of thousands of people who left Hong Kong. And I think the mentality behind it is that Hong Kong is no longer the same. And we don't recognize the Hong Kong today, where people can't go to the streets to protest. If they do, they need to get a permit, and they get chained up. Like, there is a threat between us to make sure that we're in a group, in a line. There's no freedom of speech, no freedom of press anymore. And so some people wanted to leave and to use the freedom they can have out of Hong Kong to advocate for Hong Kong, to sustain the identity and culture of Hong Kong. And I think sometimes we get lonely a lot, and the only way that I keep that and to process it is to listen to Canto music, listen to songs from hometown, look at pictures, although it makes me sad. But I do know that there are a lot of people are supporting me, including people who are in Hong Kong, who is being oppressed, who is currently voiceless. They're depending on us to speak up. And so this is what I wake up every day and do my work. This is what I think about, is to make sure that I utilize my voice and my freedom to do whatever I can for my friends. Yeah. And my friends, including those who are in jail, who were the most persecuted people in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Go ahead. The question is, what's next for you?
What's next for me? I don't think I will change. I would still be in the industry. I think when a lot of us fled Hong Kong, we kind of make a promise to our own self, but also to our friends, is that we will stick along in this movement. See it as a religion or whatever, like a faith, that one day we will be able to return to Hong Kong, and that keeps me awake every day when I wake up. And the goal is to make sure people don't forget about Hong Kong, and if possible, we ask for the release of political prisoners, and hopefully one day I will be able to see my friends, and I'll be able to buy a ticket to fly back to Hong Kong and to see my friends in the airport. That's my dream. Yeah.
Real quick before we wrap up, I want to highlight a couple of things. If you grab one of these cards, one of the questions I often get when we've done screenings of the film, people want to know what they can do. There's a couple of things on this back of the card that you can do. One of them is, after you watch the film, there's 2 QR codes on the back, one for the film and another for an impact survey. This is really helpful to us. We had a lot of very generous people who helped finance the making of this film. Making a documentary is not cheap. It's cheaper than making a live action movie, but it's still not cheap. And the survey results really help us tell them the story of the impact that we are making with the film. So if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out, we'd be really appreciative. The number 2 one on here is host a screening. Quite literally, just if you have family, friends, anyone that you can send the link to the film to, it is on YouTube. The website is freejimmylai.com. Send it to them, tell them about it, tell them, if you've watched it, what you thought about it, and ask them to watch it as well. And then the third is use your voice. Share it on social media, share it with your friends. Like I said earlier, I just doing these kinds of talks, being a producer of this film, talking about this film, speaking the truth about what is going on in Hong Kong right now. I'm in daily violation of the national security law. Breaking laws can be fun. You can join me in being in daily violation of the national security law of Hong Kong. for only telling the truth, for just telling people what is happening to the people of that city, what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to people like Francis's friends, people that she's known, and people like Jimmy Lai. So I encourage you to do that. And I just want to say thank you so much to John, to NDSU, and to all of you for being here, for having us, and for listening to us. We appreciate it a whole lot. Thank you.
Yeah. And if I may add, I think it's what you're saying is completely right. You don't have to be like me or people back in Hong Kong to protest, march, go to the streets, hold signs and chant, or be on the stage to talk about these things. With the internet, everyone can be an activist. We can all say things about what we care about. It doesn't have to be Hong Kong, it can be any other thing. But your voice on the internet, on social media would be really important. The hashtag Jimmy Lai, hashtag free Jimmy Lai, hashtag free Hong Kong. The more people who tweet about it, post about it, the more people know about what's going on and know that this is an issue that they can learn about and pay attention to. And I think everyone here can do so.
Yeah, it is not hashtag activism, right? This actually does matter. And this is the field that I work in. I build digital communities mostly for the point of activism. And there's studies that I have looked at that show that when the kind of community that you're targeting, when you get, I believe it's 35% acceptance of an idea, that is a tipping point. If you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, right? Once you get past that tipping point, everything starts to slide in your way. So, the more people that you can tell about this, the more people who know what is going on, it does matter. It does make a difference. Saying the name of political prisoners matters because it makes it harder for the people who are imprisoning them and who are violating their rights and the rights of people that they represent to do the things that they are doing when we are talking about the kind of political prisoners that are out there. So your voice really does matter. You influence people. You have a community. You have people who listen to you, and you can make a difference. So thanks so much for being here today and for listening.
Thank you.